Howdy, and welcome to another episode here at Crazy for Texas. I'm your host, Amber, and our goal here at Crazy for Texas is to explore the treasures of Texas history buried right in our backyards. We strive to create a map for others inspired to follow and learn more about Texas beyond the textbook. Its people, towns, heritage, traditions, and the legends that led us to where we are today. Please share your stories or questions by email to any of our social media platforms. Let's learn from and alongside each other as we dig for another nugget of Texas history. For now, sit back, put your boots up, and get ready for another episode on Crazy for Texas. Well, here we are, our very first episode for Crazy for Texas. One of my favorite stories of me from whenever I was a little girl is from one of my 93-year-old grandmother's close friends, Sue Crum. I guess I couldn't have been more than about 4 years old. One Sunday morning, Grandmother picked up Mrs. Crum so we could carpool together to church. She slipped into the front bench seat. Now, I need you to get a clear picture of this. This is back when seat belts were optional and booster seats were non-existent. As Mrs. Crum settled in with her purse and Bible, I opted to scooch all the way forward and saddled my elbows up on the back of the bench seat between the two ladies and announced, "I'm going to talk all the way to church because I love to talk." Now, when she tells the story, she is still exasperated as she says, "And Amber, you talked all the way to church." And here we are today. Who knew how prophetic my statement would be? This one's for you, Mrs. Crum. Now, before I begin, I want to make a confession of sorts. I am not a professional historian. Let me repeat, I am not a professional historian. I am, however, a professional lifelong learner. I have a thirst of knowledge and a love of Texas history. I want to take you along on this journey to know more about this land we call home and the nitty-gritty stories behind its development. As I research, there is so much cross-referencing and rabbit holes that I am constantly trying to make sure that I understand what I'm reading. History is recorded, true, but it is also a subjective tapestry woven from different perspectives which shape personal realities. I will be placing all of my resources in the show notes so that you may continue your own personal quest for information or to fact-check me. Please know that I will make mistakes, but they will be corrected. Thank you for your grace-filled corrections, constructive feedback, and inquisitive questions that lead to further exploration as we travel down this untrodden road together. Okay, let's get on to what you're really here for. Our first stop on our roadmap quest for Texas history is right in our own backyard, Anahuac, Texas. I have to tell you, before our journey with Crazy for Texas began, I knew very little about Anahuac, beyond the quick and unpopulated lines at their DPS office and the annual Gator Fest. Johnny and I once even took a quick tour of the town as we contemplated buying a house there. Now, although we could have had a more than convenient access to water for our boating adventures, I only hesitated because the total student population of Anahuac High School, home of the Fighting Panthers, was a mere fraction of my entire graduating class. It was just so small. I wonder if I'd known then what I know now about its amazing history, if I'd given Anahuac a fighting chance of becoming our new home. The land of Anahuac was initially inhabited by the Native Americans. Now, I've read a couple different accounts about tribes that have lived there. Texas Escapes reported the Atacapon Indians were there, whereas the City of Anahuac website contends that it's the Karankawas. Honestly, both of these could be accurate. According to Texas Parks and Wildlife, both of these Native American tribes lived along the Gulf Coast region of Texas. While the Karankawas lived along the southern coast, the Atacapons took to the northern coast. Now, as an interesting side note, while learning about these tribes, it turns out that they were known for cannibalism. It wasn't that they chose humans as their favorite source of food or, the flesh, But because they were hungry, it was more the spiritual idea of gathering the strength of their enemies by consuming them. Now, as far as Texas exploration, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda was the very first recorded European to map the Texas Gulf Coast in 1519. And less than 10 years later, 1528, traveling from Spain, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, which means head of cow, shipwrecked near Galveston and explored the land as they journeyed with the intention of reaching Mexico City. Now, I'd like to stop here and make a special note. According to the Bullock Museum, within Cabeza de Vaca's group of about 100 men was Estavanico, and he was a North African slave that is believed to be the very first person of African descent to come to North America. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this is. I mean, there could have been more Africans that had come with other explorers, but Estavanico would have been the very first documented. In the late 1600s, Spanish and French exploration pushed west. They fought over the occupancy of this Gulf Coast region of Texas. The Spanish ended up setting up missions as a show of dominance and keeping the French away. About 1816, according to Kevin Ladd from an entry in the Handbook of Texas, this area became known to the Anglos as Perry's Point, after Col Henry Perry set up camp there after a voyage in Galveston Bay. Then, in 1830, a Mexican commander by the name of Colonel John Davis Bradburn was given the orders of reinforcing the Mexican law of April 6, 1830, which forbid additional American immigrants from coming into the area thereafter, and then in the addition of building a fort there. So let me give you a little information about this fort. Although it was only 30 feet by 40 feet, recent excavations have found that the walls were 3 feet wide, okay, constructed of regular-sized bricks. So this fort might have been small, but it was definitely stout. Now, while Colonel Bradburn... Wait, I just want to stop right here. I'm not sure if you're wondering, like I did, how in the world does this Mexican colonel have a gringo name? Well, come to find out, he wasn't Mexican. He was actually born in Virginia. He ended up fighting for Mexico against Spain in the fight for the land of Texas, and just ended up staying in the Mexican army. Hopefully that's a little bit more clear for you now. Made sense to me. Okay, so after Colonel Bradburn began construction on the fort, in January of 1831, General Manuel de Mier y Terán, the commanding officer of the Coahuila in Texas, officially named the city. Terán was inspired by the Aztecs and accurately gave this area the name meaning land on edge of water, what we now know as Anahuac. Now remember, Texas at this point is still considered a part of Mexico, so it was pretty unsettling to their government that most of its population was white Anglo. So here comes the law of April 6, 1830. It was set into place to keep foreigners out of the Mexican land of Texas, but it also began taxing imports to encourage more trade within Mexico. Sounds familiar, huh? Well, it didn't sit well with the Texians, which were Americans that had migrated to Texas prior to the April 6th law. There was also internal political confusion or conflict with the law. You see, Colonel Bradburn interpreted the law of April 6th to nullify the previous land grants that were given prior to its instatement. Well, in January of 1831, the state-appointed Land Commissioner of Mexico, Jose Francisco Madero, was sent to sign over titles to those that had settled the area prior to 1828. This was in direct violation of Colonel Bradburn's interpretation of the law, so he had Madero arrested. Madero was just doing what he was told to do, so he ended up being released and was able to issue 50 land grants, and while he was there, he oversaw the organization of the Municipal of Liberty and appointed it as the Ayuntamiento, or the town council of the area, before returning back home. Even though Jose Francisco Madero was acting in accordance with his powers, Colonel Bradburn took it as a direct offense to the Mexican government's control over the area. You see, he believed that the control belonged to the government and not the states. To add to the discourse of the area, less than a year later, when General Manuel de Mier y Terán returned to visit Anahuac, he ordered the ayuntamiento to be moved from Liberty to Anahuac. The general also ordered Bradburn to inspect Anglo-American lawyers' certifications, because at that time Anglos were not allowed to practice law without special licensure from the Mexican government. And honestly, there would be only one of those. They were also to inspect the land titles of the current residents, and, but most insulting, was the collection of duties from ships that were already in the area. The collecting agent that was supposed to gather the funds had not even yet arrived, so the ship captains would have had to wait even longer in Anahuac for his arrival to be cleared, which would totally delay and inconvenience the captains even more. Well, it seems that they had places to go and people to see, so some of those Brazos captains ended up sailing right on through without getting the going through the proper channels, and gunfire was exchanged between the local Mexican soldiers and the ships. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that these Texian boys aren't good at backing down. Bradburn was not winning any more confidences with the Anglo-Americans with his choice of construction workers building the Anahuac fort. Although it's reported that less than 20 of his command were former convicts working off their sentence to earn their freedom, the Texians blamed the local theft and attacks on their women on the said convicts. Bradburn had also employed 2 or 3 runaway slaves as indentured servants when they applied for asylum. You see, Mexico was against slavery, but in the United States, well, you know. As it turns out, the Louisiana slave owners were serious about getting their property back. William B. Travis, that's right, our beloved William B. Travis from the Alamo, he was hired to take the slaves back into possession and return them to Louisiana. Now, this is where he gets a little sneaky. Travis had concocted a plan to trick Bradburn. He snuck a note over to Bradburn advising that a group of people from Louisiana were headed his way to take back what they felt was theirs. Now, when he learned that he had been deceived, he ended up throwing Travis and his partner, Patrick C. Jack, into a makeshift prison cell. Miss Henson, in the Handbook of Texas, explains on their way to rescue Travis and Jack, a force of about 200 Anglos overtook and captured Bradburn's entire cavalry of 19 in Turtle Bayou, which is just about 6 miles from Anahuac. These vigilantes expected to trade the cavalrymen for Travis and Jack. After a small engagement between the sides, they reached an agreement to free Bradburn's cavalry while the Anglos would head back to Turtle Bayou. Well, they were supposed to. When Bradburn realized that they had not all retreated, he refused to hold up his end of the bargain, releasing the prisoners. Then he upped the ante by threatening to fire on the town of Anahuac. While the Texian Anglos were waiting on support and a cannon from the Brazos settlements, the Battle of Velasco broke out when Mexican officials tried to keep the cannon from reaching Anahuac for aid. Meanwhile, back over in Turtle Bayou, the Turtle Bayou resolutions were composed and signed. These resolutions were under the guise that the Anglos were fighting against Bradburn as a centralist. Centralists at the time were more old school, wanting more power with the government with weaker states. Instead, they strategically aligned themselves with the Federalist movement after a recent victory under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. I bet they regret offering us those resolutions now. Bradburn's immediate superior, Colonel Jose de las Piedras, removed Bradburn from his position at Fort Anahuac, moved the ayuntamiento back to Liberty along with the prisoners. The prisoners were later released and returned to Anahuac, while William B. Travis moved on to San Felipe, where he ended up practicing law. National tariffs ended, trade returned, and all is well with the land of Anahuac. That is, until 1835. The Mexican government wanted their piece of the pie and reinstated the tariffs hardcore. Well, a citizen of Coahuila in Texas, Andrew Briscoe, had opened up his own store in Anahuac in 1835 and did not take too kindly to the new tariffs, feeling like the taxes weren't collected the same across the board. Briscoe refused to comply, so Captain Antonio Tenorio tossed him in jail. Once again, the Anglos gathered and rose up into action against his troops. Even William B. Travis set to head back to Anahuac to get the situation under control. Captain Tenorio surrendered after 6 short days, tucked tail, and moved on to Harrisburg. Now, don't think that Anahuac only had disturbances with the Mexican government. There was also civil unrest within the Anglo community. Another native of Virginia that had special ties and relationships with the Mexican government had worked his way to being appointed as the Survey General of Texas in 1829. Let me introduce you to Thomas Jefferson Chambers. Chambers and his partner were tasked with surveying and issuing land titles from Mexico for Texans that had acquired and lived on their land of East Texas before 1827. Now, I'm not sure if this was in addition to a monetary payment for services or if this is how he was just actually paid. Chambers received 11 leagues of land. A league is a measure of land that was roughly about 4,600 acres. The land he was given was in the counties of Ellis, Navarro, Liberty, Hayes, and what we now know as Chambers County. At the time, non-native Mexicans were not allowed to purchase Texas tracts of land. However, our land-hungry Chambers was able to find a way and purchased a 5-league tract of land from Vincent Padilla that had conveniently just been surveyed and titled only 25 days before the purchase date. Although loophole legal, this did not sit well with the residents of the area that had lived there before Chambers. Before Thomas Jefferson Chambers came to Texas, he did spend time in Mexico, learning the language and customs of the people. Although that is true, I do not think that it was his love of the Mexicans and their culture that incited his decision to become a naturalized Mexican citizen in 1830, more than it was the idea of opportunity and connections. I guess even then Chambers understood it is not just what you know, but who you know. He became the only foreigner given the special license and permission to practice law. Because remember, at that time, Anglos were not allowed to practice law without the special licensure from the Mexican government. He also became state attorney for Texas for 2 months and was also the Chief Justice in 1834, being compensated with more land. He was awarded 30 additional leagues, but unfortunately some of the land that he was given was land that was already spoken for. Out of the 30 leagues, he was able to only locate 13 before the land offices closed with the Texas Revolution. So now Chambers has officially 29 leagues of land altogether. That's about 133,000 acres of land. Land owned that he had to pay taxes on, but didn't always. In 1839, Chambers retired and took residence at his home in Round Point, which according to the Historical Marker database was only about 3 miles south of Anahuac. Thomas Jefferson Chambers changed the name of the town to Chambersia, more in his likeness, and also disrupted the town with his intent to sell city lots. The residents of Round Point, Chambersia, they weren't pleased, and he had quite a few land disputes. In 1842, Chambers found that his entire 5-league tract of Texas that he bought from Padilla was actually sold and bought for his back taxes that he hadn't paid. They went to court, and the land rightfully went back to the recent buyer. So what did Chambers do? Well, he killed him, of course. This was not an isolated incident of land conflict for Chambers. Thomas Jefferson Chambers and Charles Willcox were in a feud over the ownership of Anahuac. Now, Willcox had his own connections to the area and people. He opened up his own store in 1831 and was the Justice of the Peace in Anahuac in 1836 and 1846, when he was also for a brief period postmaster. He was also said to be aligned with William B. Travis and Captain Tenorio at the one-time commander of the Fort Anahuac. Now, I'm not sure exactly how this conflict arose, but we do know that it's over land. Now, if you ask me, and I'm by no means a land surveyor, and I do not have any, I mean zero, zilch experience in surveying land. But it seems to me that land disputes would have been very common back then. I mean, think about it. Let's take 1 league, about 4,600 acres, right? If you had 1 league of land, there's no way that all 4,600 acres could be monitored. I mean, there was no Google Earth back then, and I mean, bless America, barbed wire hadn't even been invented yet. So I could totally see how you could have a portion of land that was discovered and settled by a family as they were out headed west. How would they know that it belonged to someone 3,000 acres away? I guess I'm picturing kind of an unintentional squatting of sorts. I'm just saying that I could see how land disputes could happen frequently, even if it wasn't exactly what happened here. In the case of Anahuac or Chambersia, Willcox versus Chambers, I think a timeline would add a little clarity to their dispute over the land. Associates of Chambers were postmaster of Anahuac from 1846 to 1849. Willcox immediately took the postmaster position from 1849 until 1855 and called the town Anahuac. Then Chambers' associates took back the office from 1855 to 1860. Now, while Chambers' associates held the office of postmaster, the office and the town were called Chambersia. A court battle ensued between the two, and Willcox won the suit in 1862. A judge's ruling could not calm their quarreling, but a bullet could. Their conflict with one another continued until Chambers was mysteriously assassinated in 1865. The only remnants of Chambersia is the preserved house of Thomas Jefferson Chambers, located in what we still know as today, Anahuac, Texas, in Chambers County. I guess you could say that they both had a win in the end. If you have a chance, I'd like to encourage you to go visit present-day Anahuac, where you can walk the same path as some of the Texas legends mentioned in today's episode. You can find Anahuac off I-10 between Baytown and Beaumont. Be sure and visit Fort Anahuac Park, located at 1704 Main Street. There are several historical markers and plaques that will tell the tale of Fort Anahuac leading up to the Battle of the Alamo. You will also find a statue of William B. Travis and his partner, Patrick C. Jack. As the alligator capital of Texas, don't miss their annual Gator Fest held every September in Anahuac. Be sure and stay tuned for next week's episode as I take you down a rabbit hole we discovered while researching Anahuac. You won't be disappointed. It has an unsolved murder mystery, ready for speculation, a web of deception, and a mystery child. For now, I want to give a special shout out to TikTok user 1144254792861, who submitted the first correct response of Anahuac for our TikTok challenge. Keep watching. We'll have clues for next week's podcast episode. Be sure and leave your name with your answer so I can give you your props in the shout out. Thank you for listening. And as I end each podcast, I want to leave you with a couple of names of more recent famous people that are from Texas. Did you know that Jamie Foxx and Woody Harrelson are both Texans? Jamie Foxx was born in Terrell, Texas, and Woody Harrelson was born in Midland. Thank you again for joining us and discovering why we're crazy for Texas. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so we can grow and reach more listeners. To hold you over until our next adventure, visit us at crazyfortexas.net for more information and content about our explorations of the history of our great state of Texas beyond the textbook. Be sure to also check us out on YouTube and Facebook at Crazy for Texas and on TikTok at crazyfortexas.net. Remember, if you have any questions or suggestions about an episode you've heard, or even if you have an idea or a piece of your own history that's been passed down your family tree that you'd like us to explore for a future show, please contact me at host@crazyfortexas.net. Until next time,